In 2007, Ukraine witnessed one of the most disturbing crime sprees in modern history. Over just a few months, three young men terrorized the Dnipropetrovsk region, leaving more than 20 innocent people dead. When they were finally caught, the investigation revealed a dark reality that shocked the world. This is that story. Our story begins in 2007 in Dnipropetrovsk, Ukraine, now known as Dnipro, a city in the eastern part of the country, situated along the river of the same name. Travel south from here, and you'll reach the now famous city of Zaporizhia. Most of the crimes we'll discuss occurred roughly between these two regions, plus several surrounding areas. Before we continue, there's something important to note. Much of the information about this case is shrouded in mystery. Some details can be verified. Others are generally accepted as true but can't be proven due to lack of publicly available evidence. And some may be completely fabricated. We've tried to stick with Ukrainian sources from that period, as they appear most reliable and present the facts. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, people would find and publish leaked documents from cases like this online, but the original sources have since disappeared, making today's information somewhat unclear. Still, we'll try to separate what's verified from what's more speculative. So, Dnipro, 2007. Three young men who'd reportedly been friends since elementary school lived in the area. Their names were Viktor Sayenko, Igor Supranuk, and Alexander Honja. All three were approximately 18 years old at the time. Though they were often labeled as kids in news reports from that period, all three were legally adults when the crimes occurred. They appeared to be fairly normal types. They'd grown up on the edgy internet of the late 90s and early 2000s. They came from wealthy families, worked various jobs, and from other perspectives were just three friends who spent a lot of time together. Not much is known about the men's childhoods in general, but it's believed they grew up with borderline neglectful parenting, aggression, and the general edginess that most young people grow out of. But look deeper, and you can see something wasn't quite right. All three participated in a kind of face your fears exposure therapy approach to things they were afraid of as children. For instance, one of the boys was afraid of heights, so they'd spend time looking down from the balconies of tall buildings to overcome the phobia. And here's where it starts getting dark. Hanja, who's generally thought to be the lesser criminal of the three and didn't participate in the most horrific events later on, had a fear of blood. You can probably see where this is going. From this time onward, it's believed they began torturing animals to help Hanja overcome his hemophobia. Poor, defenseless creatures experienced unimaginable horrors. And as they did this, they seemed to enter a cycle of desensitization and violence. Gradually, the bloodshed got worse and worse. Eventually, boxes filled with animal remains were reportedly found where they lived. The escalation was clear, and it was only a matter of time before they moved from animals to humans. Reports indicate the crimes they would commit occurred between April and August of 2007. Other sources say it lasted only as short as a single month, but the result was the same: 21 separate murders of random, defenseless passersby. They reportedly drove around the area in a Daewoo Lancia. The reason for specifically noting this is that foreign cars were considered a status symbol in Ukraine at the time and attracted some attention. As they drove around, they looked for targets, either picking them up in the vehicle or ambushing them on deserted streets, sometimes in bold daylight. Then they would attack them with blunt force blows to the head region, typically with something like a metal pipe or a hammer wrapped in a plastic bag. Some reports say they robbed their victims and took various small items from them, but they didn't seem overly interested in monetary gain, since many victims still had money in their wallets when found. Most weren't thoroughly searched for valuables. And, by the way, these are 21 confirmed and successful murders. They attacked dozens of people during this period, many of whom survived and testified against them. The murders don't seem very well planned. There was nothing connecting the victims, different ages and genders, different locations. They ranged from young teenage boys to elderly women. The only common factor is that they were relatively unable to defend themselves. There were also numerous witnesses who saw them committing their crimes, yet for a long time, police didn't piece this together, attributing the deaths to a crime wave across the fairly wide area they operated in. But this was less a crime wave and more a tsunami. In 2007, at that time, bodies were being found almost daily, absolutely brutally killed by both Sayenko and Supranyuk. As we mentioned before, Hanja reportedly wasn't present for most or all of the murders and never personally committed murder. In some cases, 3 murders may have been committed in a single night. The men's bloodlust seemed never to cease.
Others did survive encounters with these killers. Lydia Ivanova, a woman who fed stray dogs in the area, was struck on the head. After the attack, her assailants noticed she had gold crowns on her teeth. The pawn shop they took them to would tell them the metal wasn't pure gold, just plating, and was nearly worthless. Despite this, Lydia survived this attack. In a rare stroke of luck for the victims of these sadistic killers, the street dogs she fed barked loudly and drove them away. Lydia, with her skull fractured, teeth knocked out, and missing an eye, crawled to a nearby youth center where people called an ambulance. 14-year-old Vadim Liakhov only escaped thanks to his fast feet in a car passing by on the deserted night highway. The killer chasing him turned back when the car appeared. At that moment, his accomplice had already killed a 13-year-old boy who'd been going fishing, a lucky escape for the young man. Yelena Fedina, who went to an ATM late in the day to withdraw her mother's pension, also survived. She passed a young man walking toward her under a streetlight and saw his face very clearly. This was Supranyuk, who passed her, then turned around and struck her on the back of the head. We don't know why she wasn't killed in such a vulnerable state. Perhaps something scared them off. When an investigator brought 3 photos to the intensive care unit a few days later, she confidently identified Supranyuk. Rumors of this violent crime wave eventually reached Kyiv, and a commission from the Ministry of Internal Affairs was sent to Dnipropetrovsk to establish a search team to find, investigate, and interview witnesses about the suspects. Witnesses reported that the men tried to destroy evidence by throwing it into puddles, or may have seen people fleeing from attacks. Others had even seen them attack several victims quite closely, clearly seeing the face of one or both main perpetrators in the process. This allowed police to create fairly accurate composite sketches. Despite having no economic motivation in robbing their victims, what would ultimately end this horrific game was greed. They tried to sell one victim's cell phone at a pawn shop. When it was turned on to check if it still worked, police, now alert about searching for victims' stolen items thanks to early investigations, caught the signal and arrived at the scene shortly. There, Sayenko and Supranyuk were immediately arrested. The third partner, Hanja, would be caught a bit later, attempting to destroy other stolen phones from other victims. He threw them down the toilet along with other incriminating evidence, which was later retrieved. The stolen phones were too damaged to use as evidence, but plenty of other evidence was quickly being gathered, including the men's own cell phones. This was 2007. Much of the world was pre-iPhone and therefore pre-password locks as standard, so it wasn't difficult to quickly uncover details of the men's horrific crimes. But even without the victims' phones, it was clear what they'd done, because shortly after their arrest, all 3 confessed to everything in horrifying detail during interrogations. In the subsequent investigation, to understand the full scope of the crimes, the head of the Dnipropetrovsk Regional Prosecutor's Investigation Department said, quote, "They, meaning the killers, detailed the crime scenes, the locations of blows, their numbers, and stolen items. I should also say the boys' memories are excellent. They describe the area with photographic precision. When investigators contacted the relevant district station and pulled the file for that crime, everything matched: address, nature of injuries, number of blows, and list of missing items. But let's say you ignored the fact that they confessed everything, completely disregarded it. Police would still have learned pretty much exactly what these men did. Because there was photographic and video evidence. They had filmed everything, all of it. In total, there was approximately 40 minutes of horrific violence and what they did afterward, a mountain of digital evidence. There were also about 100 photographs taken by the men during their self-incriminating rampage. According to Ukrainian narratives from the period, the footage was so graphic that the courtroom crowd couldn't bear to watch it. The killers, however, just watched and occasionally grinned at each other. Even from behind the bars of the courtroom cell, there was no remorse visible, only pride. The videos and images showed animals being killed and dismembered, attacks on people, and the horrific aftermath. People fled the courtroom crying into the street. It was that intense. A doctor had to be present in court to explain how barbaric they were. And remember, these murders were completely, utterly senseless. Some leaked footage eventually made its way to the internet, but only one became publicly known and remembered with infamy. Many of you probably heard of it, especially if you enjoyed watching edgy content in the early 2010s. It took its name as a reference to the horrific Two Girls, One Cup video of that time, which was disturbing in a completely different way. Now, this video can still be found somewhere on the internet if you know where to look. And we're saying, for God's sake, don't. The curiosity isn't worth it. There's nothing life-enriching you'll gain from watching it. You've been warned.
It's also reported that before their arrest, the men even attended the funerals of people they'd killed and took photos and videos of their horrific deeds next to their victims' graves. There were photos of them giving the middle finger next to gravestones. The men also seemed to have some kind of obsession with Nazism. As far as we know, they weren't exactly card-carrying, goose-stepping Gestapo members, and their actions didn't seem terrorist or ideological, but it's still disturbing. There are photos of Super Nukes standing smiling next to a victim's grave with what appears to be a Hitler mustache drawn on his face with blood. There were other images and videos too. They'd drawn swastikas on walls with animal blood and given the famous salute over one victim's body, just to name a few examples. If you ask us, this was more part of their edgy, nihilistic persona, rather than them actually being people calling for a Fourth Reich. But we don't have enough information to prove that conclusively. The defense claimed the footage was completely fake, hadn't gone through professional and comprehensive examination, that the men didn't appear in the videos, and that all evidence was created by police, then planted on Sayenko's computer and phone in some kind of witch hunt. And this is, of course, complete nonsense. In response, a video editor from a local television channel and many people involved in the case acknowledged that such fakery would be impossible. Victim attorney Edmund Shivan said, quote, "To produce a 40-minute video like this, you'd need a Hollywood film studio, at least a year's time, and approximately $2 million. Considering police obtained this evidence within a day or two of the main perpetrator's arrest, the idea that such a video was created, edited, and crafted should be dismissed from the start. Beyond eyewitness testimony and video evidence, bank cards, items belonging to victims, jewelry, phones, pawn shop receipts, metal pipes, hammers, knuckle dusters, bloody clothing, and even a newspaper clipping about their crimes were found in the men's homes. And of course, all the digital evidence was there too. But what would drive the final nail in the coffin was that bloody clothing. Families identified some clothing as belonging to different victims, which likely matched with the digital evidence we discussed. Investigators told the court there was nothing in the men's closets that wasn't covered with brown stains, blood from different animals and people dried long ago. But what really sealed the case was genetic evidence. DNA and genetic analysis was performed on the bloody items at great cost to the court. The results matched various victims they'd killed. The chance of one person having the same blood genotype as another is roughly 1 in 100 billion. Therefore, the probability that the blood in the perpetrator's closets didn't belong to a combination of the 21 victims and was some massive bloody misunderstanding was practically impossible. You probably won't be surprised. A jury found them unequivocally, completely, and utterly guilty of all charges. Justice was served, but it wouldn't bring back what had affected the lives of dozens of people forever. When the trial ended in 2009, Sayenko and Supernyuk received life sentences without the possibility of parole because they showed no remorse and tried to unravel the perfect case against them with fabricated evidence claims, fraud allegations, and forced confession stories. Hanja was a bit different. He showed serious and apparently genuine remorse for his role in the robberies and other things he'd participated in up to that point. Not appearing in video evidence of the murders made him very lucky, and as far as we know, he wasn't charged or accused of anyone's death. His attitude, admission of guilt, his family's compensation to some victims, his distancing from his friends when they began using violence against people, and genuine fear of what his two friends were capable of resulted in a reduced sentence. The prosecution requested 14 years. The court reduced it to 9. Hanja quietly served his sentence in a Ukrainian prison and was released around 2016. According to some sources, he was very lucky to have any future at all. But as far as we know, today he walks free on Ukrainian streets as if nothing happened. The others will rot in a cell for a long time and die in prison one day, never again knowing their family's warm embrace or life outside a concrete box. And honestly, given the scope of suffering they inflicted on their victims, that's what they deserve. In Ukraine, or at least during those times, this is how things worked. These cases would go through an automatic appeal process, but a panel of judges upheld all the convictions from every angle, despite some family members' delusional insistence. The court ruled there was no fault on the police's part in the investigation. Despite this, 3 police officers who conducted the investigation were charged with official negligence. We don't know why, but it probably related to the fact that no one connected these clearly linked murders in the same regions until it reached Kyiv. We also don't know the outcome of these charges. In any case, the court's general view of the investigation made the fairy tale innocence claims put forward by the killer's horrific parents even more illegitimate. Yet they continued giving angry interviews, claiming their innocent sons were innocent and the real killer was walking free. Whatever helps them sleep at night. The court did one more thing. It reprimanded Supernyuk and Sayenko's parents for the absolute nonsense they brought to court, probably as some kind of punishment for being terrible parents and even worse people. The court characterized the parents' behavior during the trial as unethical. Sayenko's father's conduct throughout the investigation and during trial was specifically noted in the ruling. It stated that as defense attorney, he abused his rights by spreading false information on the internet, in newspapers, and on television. Father of the Year, everyone. The truth was this. These men committed indescribable atrocities against their victims while under their parents' roof and stored evidence in their homes, in closets, on computers, under beds. We're talking about blood-soaked clothing, weapons, animal parts, and more. There's no chance they didn't know something was seriously wrong. And yet, rather than intervening, which is what parents should do, or not leading them down this path in the first place, the parents directly supported the monsters with all their escape attempts. In a way, these murders were as much a result of parental neglect as their men's own motivations. This isn't to diminish the killer's agency and what they did, but you have to acknowledge that any sane parent would have stopped this long before it began. Even during the trial, they stared down the victims' parents, smiled at their own children, and tried every way to bend the truth, all while calmly watching videos of their own sons' most violent acts ever recorded on film. Their punishment, of course, was never seeing their children again except during prison visits and knowing they'd face cruel loneliness in their narrow concrete cells. The panel of judges also focused on the motivation that had remained a mystery for many for a long time. Childish goading, the pathological need to overcome their own fears through exposure. But after a while, it was clear that was long past, and what remained was simply that the defendants did what they did for self-gratification. In short, they did it simply because they could. Aggression and cruelty had become an end in itself, an expression of their need to crush the weak and feel superior. The two main perpetrators' lack of remorse, posing with dead bodies, the torture, photos at gravestones, filming and documenting everything, all showed that for them, this was just a game. And the legacy of this great tragedy is this: there's really no positive ending. In fact, it had no meaning at all. People raised by negligent parents turned to causing harm for entertainment in the new digital age in a new and terrible way. The physical and psychological scars on those affected will last forever, even spreading around the world through gore websites and etched into the memory of those who experienced even just a small part of it. And in the end, nothing can bring back those who were lost, while the killers continue to live, even if they spend their lives in prison. We can only hope this. In a world filled with violence, this case stands out and becomes a clear message so that such things never happen again.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, feel free to share, like, and subscribe.